That's Nohana, though it's going through a rough patch right now. So I love the nurses. I'm very close to them. They've been colleagues for decades when I was an ER doc. I'm also very close to the healthcare folks that run the hospitals. They've helped us, because of the great work of doctors and nurses, had us at the top of the heap for healthcare outcomes. So I'm close to them too because they do great work. The nurses asked me to intervene, to stop the lockout or to intervene with the whole strike process. I'm not allowed to do that, not in private negotiations. And I actually had to ask the Attorney General to make sure. That doesn't mean I don't have an opinion. I do definitely want to see the nurses always compensated really well, and they will be. I'm positive. I have the utmost respect for them. But you can't have governors just jumping in and kind of breaking the negotiation process because it could be abused. Now, if both parties, both the nurses and the administration, ask a governor, or ask me in this case, to help them negotiate, I'd be honored to, because that is allowed then. I have a conference table. I would definitely play a neutral role. And I see the value in amping nurses' capacity and making sure, of course, that it is a safe work environment. But I'm not here to micromanage this thing because they are the professionals in that space. When I was a doctor, and I am still a physician, of course, but when I was a practicing physician, I was just a kind of go-to on shift guy. I never missed a shift in my life, but I was not management. So I just had that experience as a colleague.
We know that some of the nurses actually showed up to your office today, and if you can give some context into their arrival there, if you were able to meet with them or not, and just maybe moving forward, the conversations that you would like to have with them, knowing that they are trying to speak to you directly.
Sure. So I did speak actually with the head of the Nursing Association, with Rose. I did speak with Mr. Vera, with Ray. I spoke with a lot of people over the last few days. Today I didn't, because some of the nursing leadership just showed up after the beginning of their rally, and they didn't have an appointment, and I was in doing Homeland Security work with General O'Hara. There was recently, I think it's actually maybe a classified problem we had off of our shore, and I was doing our budget and dealing with the Maui wildfire crisis. So I even said, look, hold on, and I'll see people at 10:30. I'll break this meeting after a half hour and come back to it. But they left. That's okay. But I don't want anyone to think for 1 second that I was rude or dismissive of people who I care about and respect. They came with a couple legislators. The legislators should know better, or political candidates should know better. Call ahead, make an appointment, because I have all of the state's work to do, whether it's Maui or the budget, which is right here, the highlights, or Kauhale, or a million other things. So I think we have to be honest about that. But I, of course, will be available to talk. I do want them to meet face-to-face. I understand that there is going to be a face-to-face negotiation, I think, on Thursday. There's definitely room for agreement because I've heard both sides. They should agree, if I may recommend that, and everyone should be back at work because I know they love their patients. I actually know the administration cares deeply about the nurses. And all the rest of us just hurt a little bit when we see them fighting and when we're not, seeing the providers we're used to.
Take off your governor's hat for a moment, and as a doctor, do you understand their concerns? They say this is about patient safety. Do you think that those concerns are valid?
I think they absolutely mean that. I think that patient safety is the most important thing, more important than salary. That was always the case for all the doctors and nurses I worked with. They're talking about something very specific called ratios, meaning you set up a ratio on the ward or any ward, a ratio of nurses to patients. I will tell you, it's very hard to do. Only a couple states are doing that in a formal sense and doing it through negotiations because, for example, as we were talking about a little bit before, flu season comes and you see a bunch of patients come in. Sometimes you see more patients than other days. Sometimes there's a car accident, and if you're on the trauma ward, sometimes more patients come in. There could be more complex deliveries that have to happen at Kapiolani and more babies that are premature. Then they would bring in extra staff. But setting it as a standard out front is at least challenging. It's not my place to say whether that's right or wrong. I will say that the legislature looked at this for about 20 years and has never passed it because in general, the way I worked was we saw all the patients we needed to, and if we were in deep trouble, we called an extra staffer or two in. I would say this. They're smart to always look out for their patients. That's, of course, the case, and that's the case on both sides. and I expect that they could deal with this impasse if they really choose to.
On a broader perspective, when you're looking at just the healthcare industry, and this is something that you've spoken about, something you campaigned on, is just trying to get healthcare workers here within the state.
Yes.
How much of this do you think impacts that, knowing that this is going on? Does this impact at all, the state's overall plan to try to get more of these types of professionals in our community?
That's actually a really interesting question. So let me opine a little bit. One thing that we've been doing is trying to bring more nurses, and we've been doing it successfully, and doctors into our state through loan forgiveness. So we've already done now over 1,000 of these grants, call it the Healthcare Education Loan Forgiveness Program, or HELP. And so that works really well. We know that that is one of the impediments, this debt that nurses and doctors carry. And so we're a super outlier in that way. I've already put $15 million in next year's budget and the following year's budget to keep doing this. That will help. Paying nurses very well, and nurses in general in Hawaii are paid quite well. I think they're second highest in the nation. That helps a lot too. But adjusting for cost of living, it's very low. So nurses are still struggling because housing costs are so much. So it's good that their salaries on paper are good, but we have to do better for them to make sure housing is more available and cheaper. So having said all those things, these are just negotiations that happen in every state. I don't think it's going to cause some kind of like discouraging moment to not come and be a nurse in Hawaii. In fact, when people on the mainland see the loan forgiveness program and their wages, they're probably going to like the idea. Now, when we had other challenges before, like during COVID, we had to bring over 600 nurses in, just on top of our nurses, because a lot of our nurses and doctors got COVID and couldn't go to work. When we did that, we did it with travelers. We had to, I know because I was helping run point on this, we had to bring in people at top dollar from many states that we were competing with. We were competing with like Oregon and Texas, I believe. We paid hundreds of millions of dollars over time. I think it was $150 million in the first two batches of extra nurses just for a couple months. And that was because we were desperate, because we got short. Now, I hope that this lockout and strike will not go on for a long time, because I'm sure it's going to be very expensive, and the money will go to mainland people instead of to our own nurses. But having said all that, I love them both. They should get together and agree to some term, and then we can work on anything that they can't settle. If they can't settle the deal with these ratios, let's all work on it together. Let's work on it in places like the intensive care unit. Let's work on it because Hawaii is always the health state. We have better outcomes for all of our cohorts of patients, but we could suffer long term if we end up having a big kind of like rift or divorce in the family, which we don't want.
I just to close this out, because I'm looking at some of the comments coming in here, and people saying we need our nurses back to work. Governor, please intervene, end the lockout. You don't have that authority, to be clear.
Right.
I mean, just so that people understand that you can't actually do that.
Yes.
What do you think of taking that kind of a severe action on behalf of Hawaii Pacific Health? I mean, that is a pretty severe route to take.
Yeah, Hawaii Pacific Health, I believe, did that because of the second strike, and they had to bring in people for at least like 5 days. And, people negotiate harshly, both sides. I would say that's pretty harsh. It's also harsh to call the leadership at Hawaii Pacific Health some pretty harsh or almost racist names. I mean, that's been going on behind the scenes with letters and things. It's bad on both sides. Most nurses love the administration. The administration loves most nurses. I'm sure of that. I can't break in because it would be abused very quickly by other governors, potentially. And if I were in kind of investing political energy like that, which, like I said, I'm apologizing, but I'm literally not allowed to do it, you would see people always playing favorites in different industries. It would be basically what it would do is it would negate the value of negotiations and collective bargaining completely. If any governor could just come and put their finger on the scale, so you just can't do it. I hope that they will both de-escalate. I think that some of the harsh treatment that the nurses have felt should be addressed. That we should be very sensitive about that. I know some felt very impugned in the past couple years, and I also think it's not helpful to call your family bad words and bad names, because that just creates terrible feelings going forward. These are people that are going to work together and are still going to run a great hospital. Whether it takes 5 to 10 days or 2 months, that remains to be seen. I really don't want to see the nurses off work for very long, because that will affect their lives. It'll affect their ability to pay for their rents. It'll affect our economy. It'll affect, the worst thing it could affect was possibly our access to care. Although I do think they have people filling in now. They do. All of these things are very real for we as just citizens of the state. But hopefully negotiations get done, and then they don't have to do them for a long time. The reason this is a big deal is because all of the other hospitals are going to also have to negotiate with their nurses in the coming months, and it would be better just to set a baseline, figure this thing out. I think nurses should be at the top or amongst the top paid professionals in a state because of the work they do, and that is already playing out. So I'm a fan of the nurses, but I have some limitations on where I can intervene.
Want to also ask you about another headline that has just been released today, and that is the merger of Alaska Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines continuing to move forward. Also getting note of the role Peter Ingram will play, stepping down and now having the Alaska Airlines CEO take over. Wanted to get your thoughts on where things are with this deal, and the thought that there will be a CEO of this company that is actually not here in Hawaii, and any other thoughts and conversations that you're having about this merger.
Sure. Big question. So this has been going on for a couple months, and I am very close to Ben, who runs Alaska Airlines. He's a good human being. We worked closely over the last 2 months. When I say we, I'm saying our administration with the federal government, saying, okay, these are the things we need. We need to make sure the routes are maintained, especially the inter-island routes. We want to see expansion of our capacity to travel as a hub, which was granted. We want to see investment in our local airports, which Alaska is going to do. We want the brand to remain intact because it is still also Hawaii or Hawaiian Airlines. If you're in Hawaii, that's very important. Another thing we fought for is make sure people didn't lose their benefits, their miles that they've accumulated, and that long-term workers stayed in their jobs. So all those things happened. So I definitely shared my opinion. Again, I have to stay out of private negotiations. There's a theme here, but I was able to share my opinion. And my opinion was, as long as you meet those criteria, the Department of Justice shouldn't really get in the way. Let them work out their differences. And so Hawaiian and Alaska came to an agreement. One of the realities is Hawaiian Airlines was losing about $1 million a day. And if they had gone suddenly bankrupt, I think they could have been, the victim of a violent takeover where we wouldn't have had the same consideration. Maybe we would have all lost our mileage. Maybe they would have cut half the jobs, whoever came in. So those things won't happen. Big deal, big day.
Yeah, I want to ask you about crime and
Yes.
about the West Side and what we have been seeing. We know that this is really the purview of the county. Law enforcement is, of course, up to the city and county of Honolulu, but you're responsible for the whole state, and obviously you also live here. So what are your thoughts on what's been happening on the West Side?
So when the second tragic murders occurred, we convened an emergency meeting in the middle of the night with terrific regional legislators like Andrew Topola, Cedric Gates, and the other guys, Keela, the mayor, myself. We got together with the chief of police, and we immediately activated additional resources. So the state has some extra law enforcement capacity. Department of Law Enforcement, our DoCare officers, and our DLNR officers, like around the harbors. So we put a lot of extra people and eyes on the scene. It has helped. It's going to continue for at least 3 months and longer if necessary. We also encouraged, and they have, of course, agreed to have Honolulu police officers increase their kind of stake in that part of the community, increase their patrols and so on. So that's all happening. But it's not just going to be police on watch, because you also saw that last tragic act of violence occur, resulting in the death of the person who came and attacked that facility. I mean, some people just aren't mentally stable, and they get into conflicts, and then this kind of thing happens. So no amount of law enforcement will necessarily stop that. As far as the violence that happens with young people, we now need to give them a lot more opportunities. And I mean rec centers, places that are peaceful and safe that they can go and seek refuge in. We have to give ways out of gang life for people, off-ramps for those kids, extra education opportunities. We need to definitely encourage them to trade in their guns, especially ghost guns, for whatever they're willing to accept, because there will be moments of passion. And as much as we'd like a governor to be able to stop all that, we have all sorts of laws on the books. people still do this stuff. But so we have a long-term plan. I have our military leadership is actually supporting it. We also have the person that's Tia Harsock, who's our point person with Andrew Topola and others, that's going to work on kind of mental health care and trauma-related issues. She runs our wellness side of our government, and a lot of this is making sure that people are well. It's going to take time. There's a lot of desperation out there. When people are desperate and they don't have much else going on in their life, they form these kind of cohorts which can be really dysfunctional. That's when you get extra drug dealing, extra acts of violence, and so on. It's a part of society which is the most tragic part. And there are individuals that end up as collateral damage, and we've seen some of that.
You mentioned guns, and a lot of guns have been involved in the violence that we're seeing on that side. What specifically do you think could be done in that manner? We know that in the past you've done the gun buyback program. Is that something you look to expand or do more of? And what specifically could you think help in this situation?
Yes. So I've asked our guys to do quarterly gun buybacks. Usually we've gotten about 500 guns. Usually it includes semi-automatic weapons and a lot of ghost guns. We've had machine guns come in. We give grocery cards, so it's guns for groceries, and that's always good. If people have young kids that can help them, we can get them the food they need. Also, it's a pretty much no questions asked situation. We just take the guns and hope that we're going to get less violence. So that's going to definitely happen. Now on ghost guns, which we've moved legislation, and special thanks to, say, Carl Rhodes and Dave Tarnas, who are the judiciary chairs, those bills have been great. We've now seen other ways that people get around them, like people have been using 3D printers to print ghost guns. We're going to be cracking down on that quite a lot. And of course, we're going to seize those kind of illegal guns. I want people who are professionals to be able to have their guns and people who go through the proper training. But obviously, it doesn't work well enough because last year, the first year of our term, we saw a young woman take a bullet to the head when she was just standing with friends. I think it was gang-related. Then we've seen these acts of violence. And the fact that they're happening in the West Side, I think that it's kind of been like a combustible situation. Homelessness surge, lack of job opportunities and life opportunities, young people feeling that they didn't have any hope, and then these acts break out. So we all have to chip in as a community. We have to give more opportunities for people. Some of the things that I'm really focused on as a governor are not specific to the violence, but they're meant to stop violence. For example, getting much better wages for people so that they don't get into desperate situations, so they don't get near divorce and have their family wrecked and feel desperate. That's when people commit self-harm. That's when people commit violence against others when they're frustrated. So wages helps with violence. Better education helps because people have better opportunities. There's a lot of other things that I believe personally we can do. Getting people access to healthcare, make sure everyone has healthcare so they don't go bankrupt. Make sure everyone has access to mental health care if they're feeling like they might crack. That's what we probably saw with that gentleman who prepared to attack former President Trump again. That guy was from the mainland, but then he came and lived in Hawaii for a while, and he appeared, based on what we've heard, to be unstable. We want to get someone like that care so that they don't ever do something terrible, because it's terrible to commit political violence.
I'm sort of hearing you approach this problem from two sides, which is one is the law enforcement and one is the prevention side. And those preventative measures could take a long time to actually yield results and require a lot of investment. Is this something that you'll be looking to the legislature to allocate specific dollars for? Or, what you're talking about requires a lot of resources. Not that it's not a good idea, but just that it's not free.
Yes. Great comment. So some of these things do take a long time. Some really worked fast, though. Let me give you an example. I felt from the get-go the best thing we could invest in right off the bat was teacher salaries, because teachers educate all of our children. We have 180,000 kids in public schools. We don't want teachers constantly leaving or having, I think it was something like 1,200 vacancies every year, because then you have to re-educate teachers, and it's difficult, right, to get them to understand our culture. But our kids must be educated so we avoid these, cascading challenges. Well, we renegotiated that contract so that teachers, instead of starting at $38,000, very, very little, start at $50,000. And there's a higher cap that they can go up. So now that teachers who have a lot of experience can go up to $108,000 a year. for the 10-month school year. That immediately, in the first year, was so good, though there's still more to do for teachers. Teachers should still be paid better. But that immediately gave them an opportunity to stay on. A lot of teachers didn't retire. They stayed because they saw the better end of the rainbow. It was easier to recruit teachers as compared to other states at 50,000 rather than 38, where you can't even afford a house. And we decreased the shortage by like 80% in 1 year just by changing that. Now, yes, I think it cost $100 million. However, one lawsuit could cost us $50 million if we don't live up to our standards of protecting people, or a federal designation that our schools have to be overhauled because they're not good enough could cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. So there is a method to this madness. I think treating everyone with respect, and I can come back to the nurses. The nurses and the administration, if they treat each other with respect and they pay each other well enough, they'll be pretty satisfied. About 2/3 of the nurses that were polled feel very satisfied in their profession, but you want everyone to feel valued and respected. So we always can do more, but putting money's in the right place when it's for everyone, education and healthcare. You heard me talk about repaying people's loans. Repaying people's loans means that that's an extra 750,000 people in our state don't have to scramble to find a nurse or a doctor, because we kept those doctors and nurses here in the fold. So things that are in the public interest, we invest in. And then there's, some other wanna-haves, which I'm also sometimes supportive of. Stadium is one. Stadium is, I think, central to what we need for a society, but it's a little different than having nurses in a hospital.
You mentioned education, so I think this is a good segue as we talk about one of the other things that education is, the education sector is dealing with, and that is the school bus shortage that is currently happening right now. There are many parents who are still continue to be frustrated about transportation for their kids to and from schools. What can you tell us about where things stand on that, and what might look like a resolution to this problem?
Yeah, that was something that really, really angered me when it happened. We got only a couple days notice that the company that we contracted with that won the bid didn't have enough school bus drivers. Now, why didn't we have enough school bus drivers? Well, it always comes down to availability of workforce and wages, and they just couldn't find enough or hire enough. So I went into emergency rules to allow us to use professional drivers that drive shuttle buses and help the hotels and so on. And so that has alleviated some of the problem. So 91 of the routes have been covered. There's still 56 routes that are still not adequately covered by last count, and that's still not acceptable. I'm still kind of angry that we didn't get more notice. But again, this speaks to the larger question which we have, which is we really do have a workforce shortage. Ever since COVID, it's very difficult to find people. And try this one on for size. As we pay professions better, people will not need to have a second job, which is great. But we are so short on many of our different disciplines that those second jobs, like I have a cousin, for example, here. I'm sorry, forgive me, a brother-in-law. I have a cousin also as a teacher, but the brother-in-law is the example. The brother-in-law I have often works some extra shifts at the hotels, and he makes a couple extra bucks, and he loves doing it. He's a teacher. Now, as teachers' wages go way up, hopefully he won't need to have a second job, but then we're going to be even shorter where the second job employees go. That can certainly be said of people who are working a lot of overtime too. As wages go up, they may not want to work as much overtime, which is good for their lives. But what will that mean if we're short in different disciplines? Bus drivers are one of those less paid jobs. And if those individuals can go get jobs at the hotels, say a good negotiation occurs and someone's now making $70,000 or $75,000 working at a hotel doing support instead of driving the bus, they may do that. So we're going to struggle for a long time. Interestingly, we are open to immigrants as compared to a lot of what's going on in the United States. I'm an immigrant. A lot of people I know are first or second generation immigrants. And I would say we should be open to working with everyone because we're going to need the workforce, especially in places like agriculture and some of the jobs that are just maybe not the jobs that we're filling easily.
Okay, we want to ask you about politics both at the state and national level. We are going to take a short break right now. We'll continue our conversation with the governor. Stay with us. Spotlight Now continues right after this.
Hello and welcome back here to Spotlight Now. Once again, we are joined by our guest, Governor Josh Green, catching up with the governor. Governor, it's been some time since we caught up. Since this has happened, an election has happened, and there will be some changes coming into the Hawaii State Legislature. Speaker Scott Saiki, someone who you've campaigned for, has led the House for some time now, will not be, of course, in office next legislative session. Talk to us about how you think that will change the dynamics that you may have with the legislature, the leadership overall, and your thoughts of how things are going to pan out next legislative session.
Sure. Yeah, you're totally right, Ryan. Huge change. Scott Saiki devoted the last 30 years of his life to service. He was an extraordinary legislator and a good friend. He passed things that no one else could pass over the years. It was under Scott Saiki's leadership as Speaker that we passed the major increase in minimum wage, that we have moved gay marriage forward, that we did the largest tax break in history. I mean, this guy was a killer. He was quiet. He didn't take a lot of credit. He got edged out in the race by Kim Koko Iwamoto, and I think he lost because it is difficult if you don't sing your own praises very often and you're in a district that you can't walk door to door and be seen. That's the case. I'm pretty sure that that's what happened. But life goes on. I think after 30 years, he has an incredible amount to still contribute. And if I'm lucky, if I'm very fortunate, I'll be able to somehow convince Speaker Saiki to come and work in our administration. I would like him to be my insurance commissioner going forward, as our current insurance commissioner is probably going to the federal level in November. That's Mr. Ito. And Scott, he's just terrific. I mean, this guy knows the issues. He could help us with our insurance crisis quite a lot. He's been working on that. Sometimes you catch an unlucky break, and that's kind of what happened with him in this election, in my opinion. People will have different opinions about that, but I'll tell you, for anyone who was convinced to vote against him because they thought he didn't do anything for them in their district, they were terribly mistaken. Kim Koko, I'm sure, is a good person, and she'll probably do a good job, but it is a very different amount of leadership that they're going to get out of that district for the foreseeable future, because when you lose the speaker from your district, you lose a major amount of clout. Now, going forward, I'm hearing that Nadine from Kauai is going to become speaker. First woman speaker. Fantastic thing. That is just awesome. And I'm sure she's going to govern very well. We've met several times already. The truth is, many of those committees are going to stay the same. I think their core is solid, but it does change things a little bit because the Senate will have now, and it has had for some time, more seniority, and that always helps a body, right? So the Senate doesn't change very much. I think it's about 2/3 of the House is in their first 2 or 3 terms. Very young and new and bright legislative body. So that's what you'll see. But I'm going to make sure that we continue to stay focused on the main things, which is affordability and housing and homelessness, dealing with our crisis in Maui and so on. We've already been working on the budget together. I'm hoping for a collaborative budget, not in conflict with one another. So good things are coming.
I want to go back to what you said about Scott Saiki, because I had heard that there was a possibility that he would be joining you at some level, but this is the first I've heard a specific job mentioned.
Yes.
Have you had those conversations with him, and is he receptive to doing that? I know that given his district, or his former district,
Yep.
it's so many condos, and that he had been championing some legislation to try to shore up some of these insurance rates. But have you had those talks with him? Is he open to it?
I have had those talks with Scott. And I will respect his time frame. He's actually still speaker until November, so he's got some great work to clean up and finish off, some of which is this exact issue, this insurance question. But I have offered him the position, provided that Gordon does go over to the federal side, and I think that that's all but guaranteed. Also, I really need someone of great skill and competence in that position, because we're going to have a lot of challenges with insurance after the wildfire, after what we've already seen with condo insurance going through the roof. I intend, and I shared this with Speaker Saiki, I intend to make this a cabinet level post, meaning the person will sit in the cabinet, will speak directly to me, and offer me their best advice to solve problems. This is going to be one of our huge challenges over the next, 2 to 10 years, frankly, and I need to take care of this for our people.
Let's talk about this insurance issue that has come up. You've talked about it before. We've had Commissioner Ito on here as well. And there seems the last time we talked to him that there was a sense of urgency that something needs to be done and that maybe it could not wait to the next legislative session. What can you tell us about the progress that has been made on this issue and specifically to those who find themselves in the condo market and are really struggling right now?
Yes. So the committee is making recommendations to us kind of in the moment, right as we speak. There does not seem to be a desire to have a special session because we're only a couple months away. I did use some emergency powers to allow them to access some of the funds that we have so that they can stabilize the market. We have this hurricane relief fund, and that can be used through investment to kind of help us out a little bit. They're going to give us formal recommendations. The question of whether or not we have to have the exact same standard on upgrades of facilities, that's one thing that they're discussing. I also think that we probably should have a reinsurance market or even a captive market for ourselves, meaning that we control some of that insurance. And usually insurance makes about 50% profits, against the premiums, something like that. The insurance people might object because they have costs to operate, but believe me, they don't pay out what they take in ever, except in the circumstance of the wildfire. And that was a once in a, generation kind of disaster. So if we keep some of those resources here in our state, and we're very good at captive insurance, we could kind of find our way out of this problem. So there's a lot of things that are happening. But if I'm lucky and I get someone with the acumen that Scott Psyche has, then I'm really in a good place. It is always wonderful when you get to hire someone into your cabinet that has really deep experience. And he does have that. So we'll see. I will tell you the next time I see you, or you can ask Scott when you see him on the, kind of out there walking. I need him. I need his expertise and wisdom on this kind of issue.
We know that you have a special affinity for Hawaii Island. Of course, that's the first place that you came to when you came to Hawaii. So I'm interested to know how closely you're watching the Hawaii County Mayor's race, and if you have any thoughts on who should be victorious in that race.
Yes, I will tell you I think highly of both of the candidates, but I'm absolutely supportive in this case of Mayor Roth. I've worked closely with him through thick and thin during disasters. When I was lieutenant governor, we were working together already. He is a great mayor, and maybe Mr. Alameda will be next up. That might be great. I could easily see myself supporting him in the next election because I kind of have a lot of high regard for him. But in this case, I think that Mayor Roth has done a very good job, and I don't think people should bounce from their jobs if they're doing well. Usually then it's just some kind of divisive politic on the ground, and that's not a good way to elect people. It's a mistake usually to throw someone out if they've been working hard for the people. That's definitely the case of Mitch Roth, and in my opinion, he deserves another term, and maybe the other guy will come next.
And we're actually looking forward to speaking to both candidates coming up on a special spotlight now. We're going to have both candidates that we are going to be doing a discussion with. So stay tuned in the coming months for more information on that. Going from local politics to national politics, we haven't seen you since you returned from the DNC. Wanted to get your thoughts about how that experience was and also where things are now in the election. We know that you have been a very vocal and strong supporter of the president and vice president of the administration, often sometimes appearing on national media as well as other outlets look to get your opinions and thoughts on where things stand nationally. What can you tell us about that experience as a whole, but also about the way that the race is shaping up?
Sure, and make sure I comment on how it's going to affect me in the future because people keep asking. So, look, it was an extraordinary experience to be in Chicago. I'd never been at a convention before. I loved providing my perspective on who should become our next president. Just like we are about to have our first woman speaker, we're about to have our first woman president. Kamala's going to win this race 51-47, something like that. I expect she'll win Pennsylvania by 2.5 to 3%. Same thing in Michigan, a little more in Wisconsin. And she's going to compete in North Carolina. But people shouldn't let down their guard if they happen to be supporters of Kamala. They should bust their butts and campaign. And if you're watching this show and you're a supporter of Trump, I respect that. People should vote their conscience. I think that Hawaii will tend to lean heavily towards the Democrat, but I will tell you that I experienced Kamala up close. She is very sharp. She is a great person. She has experience, and she should become our next president. Also, I had an opportunity to get very close to her husband. We've spent time together. These relationships are helpful. We will be in a better position as long as I'm governor if she is president, because I had a lot of support from President Biden and her when we were dealing with the crisis on Maui about 13 months ago. So I think it was amazing. It was just absolutely amazing to be with them. It's interesting to watch this election because from my perspective, the other ticket, Mr. Trump and his vice presidential choice, are really way out there right now. They're talking about people eating dogs and cats, and then regular people are trying to find a way to afford housing. And they're talking about Kamala's race when, the vice president and Governor Walz, who I'm also very close friends with through my governorship ties, they try to make sure that no one's talking about race because we want to treat everyone like an equal. This is a very important moment for our country. And it's not about Republican versus Democrat. It's about who treats people with respect and dignity versus who divides us. And unfortunately, Mr. Trump divides terribly. Who knows what will happen? The polls have never been totally accurate, so it's difficult to say, but I really feel strongly that Kamala and Tim will win. Now, a lot of people have been asking whether or not I'm going to go and join the administration, and it's very, very flattering. I will tell you that as someone in health or Surgeon General, everyone's always chattering about that. I'm totally committed to Hawaii. I'm staying. I'd be honored to serve on a committee or run a committee for the president if they asked, if she asked me. But I have a job to do here. I love it. And I don't want people to have any confusion about that at all. It would be an honor just to help out. Someday in the distant future, when I've done all that I can for Hawaii, who knows what jobs I'll do. But I would love to do this job, and then I will definitely seek re-election in 2 years because there's so much work that I'm passionate about.
You anticipated my next question because there has been a lot of chattering in the political world about what could happen if she were to be elected, especially given how involved you've been also helping them fundraise and just being out there, as Ryan mentioned, out front nationally about the president and voicing your full-throated support. But we heard it here,
Yes.
Fully committed to Hawaii.
Fully committed, and look, I'm already preparing to campaign on a record, which I'm proud of. I'm proud that we've been able to make these big changes in the tax structure, and there's more to do on housing for sure. We've done a lot on homelessness. Maybe we'll talk about that. We've dealt with the largest crisis ever, but this is not an hour for me to be campaigning. I'm just definitely telling you that there's so much more work to do that I love doing with Jamie and my team, so we're going to do it. But first things first, Kamala has to win her election, and it is challenging because we've never had a woman before, which is outrageous. We've had only one African-American president, which is pretty shocking. But we're going to double down with Kamala. And, I think she has grown so much in the last several years as vice president and as senator before that she comes with a ton of experience. And I expect she's going to exceed every expectation because she's going to be inheriting a country that's deeply divided. And when people have challenges like that as a president, they usually become great presidents. And so that's what I expect.
Want to switch gears now and focus on some things back home. Of course, Maui continues to be ongoing, and we know that there are a lot of discussions happening, especially in Washington, D.C. Senator Schatz, as well as the rest of the congressional delegation, continues to try to educate colleagues that they have in Washington, D.C. about the importance of the recovery efforts and rebuilding of Maui. What can you tell us about where things stand with not only the delegation and trying to secure some more federal dollars,
Yes.
But where things land right now as we continue on in this rebuilding process?
So yes, I'm very fond of our congressional delegation completely, and they're chasing about $1.2 billion of what's called CDBG-DR money, disaster relief money. That's what the DR stands for. We need that money. I've of course spoken to the heads of FEMA and HUD, and that money needs to come to the county so they can rebuild the infrastructure, rebuild housing. We, for the purposes of this discussion, are already building 1,044 transitional homes. We've already had well over 1,000 applicants for it, and we're going to finish that up by springtime, and that's key. So it's already paid for, but we need so much more resource to help rebuild Lahaina. The disaster cost $13 billion, just so everyone understands. We have already settled the lawsuits. We're waiting for the final sign-off by the attorneys for the insurance companies. They are asking for much too much money out of that settlement, and I'm pushing back. I've proposed that normally about 30% of monies from a settlement only get to people. I'm proposing the exact flip, that it's more like 70% of all the resources after costs and lawyers' fees and whatnot, who have been very helpful. The lawyers have been very good partners in this process, but after the insurers take some too, that has to be reversed. So those monies of the $4 billion, I think at least 2/3 has to get to the people of Maui so they can rebuild their homes and their lives and their businesses. That's a fight that's gone on too long. It's going to the Supreme Court next. It would be inappropriate for me to comment to the Supreme Court what they should or shouldn't do. They will follow the law. All I can say is I've done my part to fight to make sure that those dollars go back to us to heal. And it will definitely help when our congressional delegation gets us another $1 billion to heal and to help Mayor Bisson in this process. The settlement was difficult to do. I pushed it right to the edge because I didn't want anyone to go bankrupt, and I wanted everyone to be able to kind of reconstruct their lives. I've already put it into the budget plan. We have more than enough resources on the state side to help. We would pay exactly what Kamehameha Schools would pay overall. It's $872.5 million. We've already paid $72.5 million over 3 years. It's a lot of money, but it's nothing compared to the $13 billion that otherwise we would lose in a lawsuit and pay a large percentage of. So I'm trying to make thoughtful, somewhat conservative decisions about our resources and our money while at the same time helping people to heal. And just so everyone hears it, because we had a report the other day, the second part of the Attorney General's report. Okay, why did we do the report? Because I said on the second day to the Attorney General after the fire, which was August 10th, we have to be totally transparent. We have to find out any possible way to prevent this thing from happening again. And that's why they had the report, and there's 140 recommendations, and we'll be implementing those recommendations. Now, why are we paying money into this? Well, I can just be blunt about it. Everyone had some responsibility. The grass is on all the people's lands, whether it was ours or other people that are involved in the lawsuits. Those grasses were flammable. Also, our firefighters who were heroic, in my opinion, were somewhat underfunded, and we could have done better if we had more resources. There's a million things that could have happened. Perhaps we could have protected the poles better, and that's been discussed with HECO and others. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody, pointing the responsibility at all people, and the state plays a big role, and I have to see our people heal. So that's what the settlement's all about, and I deeply resent the insurance industry and State Farm holding it up, which is what's happening. Okay, so when they take a step back and look at what we need to do for our people in the state of Hawaii, I hope that they'll agree. They've been good partners over the years, giving people their claims money and so on. But in this case, the insurance industry has asked for 40% of the settlement, 40%. And that is larceny, frankly. It's horrible. And I won't stand for it. I'll fight to the bitter end to make sure the resources go back to people who lost everything.
I want to ask you a question that I kind of come at as a parent, and this is this sort of wave of governors and state legislatures that have started to ban or limit cell phones in schools. We've seen this in 20 states now, including by executive order in Virginia. So, for the most part, it's been done by legislatures or by boards of education, school districts individually. But in some cases, governors have signed mandates to limit or ban smartphones in schools. What are your thoughts? Could Hawaii join this trend? Is this something you're looking at?
I'm looking at it for sure. My children who went from charter school over to Iolani, they have a partial ban at the school, and cuts both ways. In general, I think kids should not be using phones at all on the school campus, except when they have personal and private time, because that's a time where they are connecting to friends. It can't be allowed to be a disruption in people's trig classes or their English classes, their history classes. It can't be allowed. But it was important. Those phones were important during COVID for our kids to connect. So I think what we have to do is strike the balance where there are no phones in the active classroom, but when children have free time, they should be allowed to use them to continue to connect socially. But it's difficult because it's been abused. And if we continue to see the trends where there are some harms to kids, you will see regulation You will possibly see some descriptions of the risks, like the Surgeon General has commented that perhaps social media should be described as a risk. But the very nature of having the ability to connect with a phone did do some good. And so that's why I'm a little bit torn. I think the legislature will likely take it up. I tend to think I won't do it through executive order because I think people have had their fill of my executive orders because of the fire and the condo crisis and the school bus crisis. I would like to see, and the housing crisis, I'd like to see the legislature weigh in because the legislators really are the body that are meant to make the laws because they're the closest day to day to people. I see people all the time, but I don't have access to individuals any longer at the more granular level, like when I was a state rep or a state senator. So they should bring me a bill and they should protect kids.
We are running out of time, but there's still so much we want to discuss. One of the things I just want to briefly touch upon that happened yesterday, another ceremony or unveiling or groundbreaking for kauhale that are going to be popping up, or that have popped up, I should say, in the downtown area. What can we expect next in the next locations for future kauhale and how things are going there?
Thank you for that. Yes, so, where to start? So this kauhale in Iwilei is called A'ala, and it came a day after we celebrated the life of Twinkle. And Twinkle was our hero. She was our inspiration over at Pu'ohonua, Waianae, the boat harbor over in Waianae. I think some of the violence and unrest that occurred in Waianae was because of that void of her presence and leadership. I think that is very likely, not that it was homeless related, it was just that she was central to the community, and some people felt disconnected without that kind of heart that was there. And so we saw some violence. And so we're dedicating, first of all, a lot of our kauhale efforts to her. We now anticipate that by the end of 2025, we will have 30 kauhale up, it looks like. We have more than 12 now up and running. Yesterday's is exceptional. I got to give a lot of credit to Dr. Scott Miskovich and Dr. Ireland and the mayor. The mayor's just been great, by the way, to work with. I mean, he is just terrific. So that partnership is happening. He gave us the building. We put in $4 million a year. So now you have 32 medical respite beds. And I was there yesterday seeing the patients that are really in great need, and now they're not on the street. 32 people. It's amazing. And then the 32 units or kauhale houses outside, that's 32 individuals that should come off the street that would otherwise be in a big tent or, clustered on the corner somewhere. It's really good. By my estimation, by the way, that kauhale is caring for people that would have probably cost the state and the county about $36 million a year. Instead, it's going to cost $4 million. That's what happens when you keep people from getting very sick, going to the hospital, and so on. The next kauhales, there will definitely be efforts to help Twinkle's folks get whatever they need. There's been heroes over there like you got James Koshiba, who's just wonderful, who worked with us for a year. I got John Mizuno now, who I love. They need support. They got it. Also, there's a fair amount of open land where people have asked us to put kauhales. Like some churches have asked us to do that. I like working with churches because they provide some social support in addition to the social workers and nurses that we'll hire. All this stuff is happening, and you're going to see it on the neighbor islands and Oahu. But my commitment was to really amp this so that by the end of our term, it looks like we will have about 1,734 or so tiny homes across the state so that people can live in a stable spot and not be suffering. And that's a piece of the solution. It's not the only solution. Some people should go back to the mainland. Honestly, if they have family back there and they were just kind of coming on a one-way ticket, better to be with your family and get support. But there's many solutions that have to happen. But it was an honor to do a kauhale yesterday in honor of Twinkles.
We want to do a quick lightning round. We're almost out of time, and I know Ryan's got some good topics for you, so let's do that.
That's why we always like to end our time with the governor asking him some fun, quick questions. And so as quickly as you can answer these, Governor, we have a few here. Your favorite fellow governor that is currently in office?
That's definitely Wes Moore. I love Wes Moore. He's the governor of Maryland. We've developed a bond. I have a bunch of governor friends, believe it or not. A bunch of them are even Republicans. But the relationship I have with Wes Moore is great.
Okay, what time do you normally go to bed?
Oh, I'm curious about this.
I go to bed about 8:45 usually, and I get up about 3:15.
Wow. All right. Early morning. You no doubt receive a lot of text messages. Who would you say you text the most back and forth between?
I text Jamie the most, for sure. I have on my personal line blocked a few people that text me and ask me to do God knows what. And but I try to communicate with everybody. I have received more than 1,000 texts in a day on many days.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
crazy. To be the governor. Do you have a favorite quote or line from a movie, and what might that be?
I guess this will be in honor of James Earl Jones. I find your lack of faith disturbing. When he played Vader.
And speaking of movies, if there was a movie to be made about your life, who would you want to play you? What actor?
Well, that's definitely not happening. How about Ethan Hawke? We're about the
Oh.
same age. He's better looking than me, but we're more or less the same dimensions, and he's kind of got an edge to him that I like. So Ethan, if you're out there and you want to make a really boring movie, I'll be happy to give you some tips.
And not so boring. I just was looking back at some tape. Green Bean, the early life of Josh Green.
Yeah.
I am writing a book, and the book will cover some of the things that have happened in my life, including a lot of the medical missions, going to Swaziland in Africa, to Samoa, the crisis we had with COVID, and all of those experiences kind of shaped more or less who I am. And I'm going to talk about those things in that book over time. But right now, there's not a lot of free time, so probably take a year or two.
All right.
Writing a book. That's news.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
news.
Thanks for leaving with us that cliffhanger. We'll have to ask you about it the next time you're on. Thank you so much for being here today. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, a great conversation with the governor. Again, we mark 1 year of doing Spotlight Now here in Hawaii News Now. He was our very first guest, had a lot of information back then, and continues to provide a lot of information about things that are happening here in the state of Hawaii.
Yeah, starting off with, of course, the lockout of the nurses at Hawaii Pacific Health. He has been asked repeatedly by the nurses to intervene. He says that he's talked to his attorney general. It is not legal for him to do that, and so he has no intention of stepping in. He did say that if both sides, the leadership at Hawaii Pacific Health and the Nurses Association, did ask him to mediate, that he would be happy to do that. But in his current position, he's just not able to. That said, he really sounded like he empathized with both sides.
Yeah, and we also heard that there were members of nurses that actually tried to appear in his office today, but the governor saying that he continues to wants to have an open conversation and discussion with those nurses, was not able to meet with them today. But we also heard his thoughts on the merger between Hawaiian and Alaska Airlines, citing some of the things that he was pushing for on his end to ensure that the merger does not impact some of the customers of Hawaiian Airlines.
Yeah, and also adding that he does have a favorite when it comes to the race for Hawaii County Mayor, a heartfelt endorsement there of Mitch Roth, and saying that perhaps Dr. Kimo Alameda, who is the challenger in that race, could take that seat when Roth is termed out. So very interesting always to talk to the governor. And who knew that he had time to write a book and that he gets up at 3 in the morning?
Yeah, gosh, talk about early. That's an early shift. Well, we want to thank the governor. We want to thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week where we will focus back on the rail.
That's right. Lori Kahikina will be our guest. Do send us your questions through Facebook and through our QR code. We'll see you next week and leave you with this beautiful shot of sunny skies over Honolulu.